She did not cry. That was the part she would remember longest. Not what he said, not the way the other women at the table went quiet, not the sound of her own chair scraping back against the floorboards. What she would remember was that her eyes stayed dry. It was a Wednesday. The kind of Wednesday in late October that smells like wood smoke and cold mud, when the light dies early and everyone at the table is already a little tired of each other. She had made the soup herself, a good one, with parsnips and a bone she'd been saving, and she had set it out in the good bowls, the ones with the blue rim that his grandmother had brought from Philadelphia. She had done everything right. She always did everything right. His name was Hezekiah Pruitt. Everyone called him Hez. He was 31 years old and had the kind of face that photographed well and meant nothing. She had known this about him since the third week of their marriage, which was now 2 years and 4 months behind her. His mother had arranged the match. Her father had agreed to it. No one had thought to ask Josephine. Not Josephine from the file, a different one. Her name was Josephine Pruitt, née Calloway, though she still thought of herself, in the private rooms of her own mind, as Josephine Calloway, age 24, daughter of a man who had once told her she had a mind sharp enough to cut glass. Her father was gone now. Her maiden name was gone now. Most of herself, she had come to understand, was gone now, but not all of it. "You've got parsley in your teeth," Hez said. She looked at him. He was looking at her the way a man looks at something mildly inconvenient, a gate that won't latch, a shoe with a loose heel. Not with cruelty, exactly. Cruelty would have been something. This was a kind of casual dismissal, the way you'd flick a moth off a windowsill. "Parsley," he said again and laughed, and his mother. Pruitt, who sat at the far end of the table like a judge at a bench, pressed her lips together in that way she had. The way that meant I told him he could do better and I was right. His sister was there too. And a man named Briggs who was something in the county records office, and Briggs's wife, who never said much but always noticed everything. There were 6 people at that table, and Josephine felt every one of them watching her from the corners of their eyes, waiting. She pressed her tongue against her teeth. There was nothing there. There had never been anything there. She understood then. It wasn't about parsley. It was about the way she'd answered Briggs earlier, when he'd made an offhand comment about the Caldwell property dispute. Something vague and half wrong, and she had, without thinking, said quietly, "Actually, I believe the deed of conveyance predates the county survey, which would make the fence line Caldwell's by right," and she had been correct. Briggs had known she was correct, even Hez had known, but a woman who was correct made everyone at the table feel slightly smaller, and so here they were. Parsley, she set her spoon down, not with anger, not with the kind of force that makes a point. She set it down the way you set a letter down when you've finished reading it, and have decided what to do. "Excuse me," she said, and she rose, and she did something she had not planned to do, something that came from a part of her she hadn't heard from in a very long time. She curtsied. A small, precise, entirely sincere curtsy, the kind a well-bred girl does when she is leaving a room and wants to make absolutely clear that she is the one choosing to leave it. Then she walked upstairs. She had a trunk in the back of the wardrobe. It had been there since before the marriage, a plain brown thing with brass fittings that had belonged to her mother. She had never unpacked it entirely. She told herself it was because there wasn't room. She knew, somewhere underneath that, the real reason. She opened it now and looked at what was inside. A wool dress, her mother's Bible, a tin box with $43 in it, which she had saved, carefully, over 26 months. From the household money, $1 here, $1.70 there, tucked into the lining of the tin like a quiet argument she'd been building in secret. She added her good boots, her winter shawl, the small leather notebook where she had, for 2 years, been copying out legal notices from the county paper, boundary disputes, easement claims, deed contests, with her own notes in the margins. She had thought of it as a hobby. She understood now it had been a plan. She did not take anything that belonged to Hez. She did not take anything that could be called his. She had been careful about that, about what was hers and what was his, since the first month, when Miss Pruitt had stood in the doorway of the kitchen and said, pleasantly, "Everything in this house is a Pruitt thing, dear. You'd do well to remember that." She had remembered. She had also remembered whose name was on her father's law books, stacked in the corner of the spare room because Hez had nowhere else to put them. Her name, her father's handwriting, on the flyleaf of each one. For Josephine, who will know what to do with these. She took the books. She was downstairs and out the back door before the soup had gone cold. The night was sharp and smelled of frost. She walked the long way around, through the field behind the mill, because she did not want to pass under the lit windows of the dining room. She could hear, faintly, the sound of Briggs laughing at something. She did not look back. She walked 4 miles in the dark to the home of a woman named Mrs. Hartley. Not Mrs. Hartley from any list, but a woman she had met at a church supper 2 winters ago. A widow who ran a small boarding house on the far side of Stonebridge. A woman who had once said to Josephine, "You're too quiet to be happy, child, and too smart to stay that way." Josephine had not forgotten that either. Mrs. Hartley answered the door in her dressing gown, lamp in hand, and looked at Josephine standing on the step with her trunk and her books and her dry eyes, and said nothing for a moment. Then, "Come in. I'll put the kettle on." She stayed 3 nights with Mrs. Hartley, sleeping in the small room above the laundry, waking early and helping with the firewood, because she did not want to be idle, and because it helped her think. On the second morning, over oatmeal and strong tea, she explained about the Caldwell property matter, the one Briggs had gotten wrong at the dinner table, and Mrs. Hartley's nephew, who boarded there and worked at the county clerk's office, pushed his bowl aside and looked at her with the particular attention of a man who has just realized he has been underestimating something. "The deed predates the survey," he said. "By 11 years, Josephine said. "Which means the 1871 plat is irrelevant. The fence line was Caldwell's when it was built, and it's Caldwell's now. Anyone who tells you otherwise hasn't read the original conveyance." "Have you read the original conveyance?" "I have a copy of it," she said. "In my notebook. His name was Warren. Warren Hartley, 26, with ink on his fingers, and the sort of methodical mind that is undervalued until it is suddenly indispensable." He looked at her notebook for a long time. "There's a man in this county," he said finally, "a Mr. Dunmore, who has been in a dispute with his neighbor over drainage rights for going on 3 years. His solicitor is from the city and charges him accordingly. He'd pay well for someone who could read these documents and tell him plainly what they mean." Josephine considered this. "I am not a solicitor." "No," Warren said. "But you know what the documents say, and his solicitor apparently doesn't." She moved into a boarding room above a dry goods store on Market Street, a narrow room with a window that faced east and a small desk that wobbled if you leaned on the left side. She kept her books on the windowsill. She bought a better lamp with $6 of her 43. She began, carefully and quietly, to work. It was not dramatic. It never is, the actual work of rebuilding yourself. It is mostly desk work, mostly reading, mostly writing careful letters in careful language, and waiting to see if anyone takes you seriously. Some didn't. Most men she approached were politely baffled or impolitely dismissive. But a few, the ones who were desperate enough, or practical enough, or simply tired enough of paying city solicitors for city prices, listened. Mr. Dunmore listened. He was a barrel-chested man in his 60s, who had grown up on that land, and cared about it the way men of his generation cared about land, which is to say, the way other people care about children. He sat across from her in Warren's office one Thursday afternoon, hat in his hands, and she laid out the case for him plain and clear: the original drainage grant, the county's subsequent error in the 1863 survey, the 20-foot discrepancy that had been causing 3 years of conflict. And when she finished, he was quiet for a long time. "You're sure?" he said. "I'm sure," she said. "My solicitor told me I didn't have a case." "Your solicitor," she said carefully, "was reading the wrong survey." He looked at her for another long moment. Then he nodded, once, slowly, the way men nod when they have made up their minds about something. She charged him $4. He paid $6 and told her to keep it. 3 weeks passed. Then 4. Josephine did not think about Hez, particularly. She thought about the work. She thought about the eastward window and how the light came through it in the morning. She thought about her father, who had told her she had a mind like cut glass, and who had probably meant it as a compliment, even though she had spent 24 years wondering why that was supposed to make her feel good. It was Warren who told her about the letter. He came into the dry goods store on a Thursday morning, looking slightly uncomfortable, which was unusual for Warren, who was generally the most comfortable-looking person in any room. He set a folded piece of paper on the counter in front of her. She had taken to working at the counter in the mornings, when Mr. Trask, the owner, was in the back with the invoices. "This came to the clerk's office," Warren said. "Addressed to Mrs. H. Pruitt, care of County Records. I think your husband may not know exactly where you are, but he knows you've been asking questions at the records office." She looked at the letter without touching it. "You don't have to read it," Warren said. "I know," she said. She picked it up. It was short. Hez had never been a man of many words on paper, though he was more comfortable with them than with spoken ones. The letter said, in essence, that she had left certain property of his in the house, specifically the law books, which he wanted returned. and that he was willing to discuss the terms of her return, if she was prepared to be reasonable. Willing to discuss. Prepared to be reasonable. She set the letter down and looked out the window at the street, at a woman walking by with a basket over her arm, and her chin up, and her step brisk in the cold morning air, and she thought, there it is. He thinks I left because I was unreasonable, and he will take me back if I agree to be less so. She picked up her pen. Mr. Pruitt, she wrote. The law books belong to my father and passed to me by his testament, which is recorded in the county files if you wish to verify it. I have verified it myself. As to the other matter, I did not leave because I was unreasonable, and I will not return on the condition that I become so. If you have something else to say to me, you know where the county records office is. She gave it to Warren to send. Then she went back to work. He came himself. That was the part she hadn't expected. Not a second letter, not a messenger, not his mother's handwriting on expensive notepaper. Hez came himself, on a gray Tuesday morning, and she looked up from Mr. Dunmore's drainage files to find him standing in the doorway of Warren's office with his hat in both hands, and an expression on his face that she had never seen before. He looked, she thought, like a man who had recently been taught something. Joe, he said. Mr. Pruitt, she said. He winced at that. Good, she thought, and then felt tired of thinking it. She put down her pen. What is it you want, Hez? He came in and sat down, uninvited, in the chair across from her desk, and for a moment he just looked at her, at the desk, the lamp, the books on the windowsill. The letter she was in the middle of drafting, with the expression of a man taking stock of a situation he had badly miscalculated. My mother said you'd be back by November, he said. Your mother was wrong. A pause. She usually is, he said quietly, and that surprised her enough that she looked at him properly. She had lived with this man for 2 years and 4 months. She had eaten 1,000 meals with him. She had watched him from across 100 rooms, waited for some evidence that he understood what was happening inside those rooms, and mostly found none. She had concluded, somewhere in the 2nd year, that he was simply absent. Not cruel, not careless, just fundamentally elsewhere, like a clock that tells the right time twice a day and no time at all the rest. But he was here now. Here and looking at her in a way that was uncomfortable for him, which meant it was costing him something. I've been told, he said carefully, that you resolved the Dunmore matter. I did. In 3 days. The documents were clear, once someone read them correctly. Another pause. He was holding his hat tightly, she noticed. The brim was slightly crushed. I should not have said what I said at the table, he said. There was nothing there. I knew there was nothing there. She waited. It was a poor thing to do, he said. I did it because Briggs looked at you the way men look at someone who has just been smarter than them, and he stopped. Looked at the hat. I don't have a good reason. I only have the true one. She did not say anything for a long moment. Outside, someone was driving a cart over the cobblestones, and the sound came in through the window and then passed. What do you want, Hez? She said again. Not angry, just asking. I want you to come home, he said. But I know that what I want is not the question you're asking. He was right. It wasn't. What would be different, she said. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not have an answer. Men of his type often didn't. They came because they felt the absence of something, not because they had thought through what would fill it. But then he said, slowly, as though he'd worked this out beforehand and was trying to say it correctly. My mother would not live in that house. She could visit, but she would not live there. Josephine looked at him. I spoke to her about it, he said. She did not take it well. But I have been the sort of man who lets his mother take things badly, and then smooths it over afterward, and I think that may be what's wrong with me. It was the most honest thing she had ever heard him say. It was also, she thought, the beginning of something rather than the end of it, which was both better and more complicated than an ending. She did not say yes, not that day. She said, there are conditions. I expected there would be, he said. The books stay with me. They are mine. Yes, the work I'm doing, I will continue it. It is not a hobby, and it is not something I will be asked to stop. He nodded. And if you ever say something like that again, at a table or anywhere, I will not wait until morning. He looked at her for a moment, and then something in his face shifted, the way a house settles after a long cold spell, and he said, I understand. She believed him. That surprised her too. She did not go back that week, or the week after. She had a case to finish, a widow named Mrs. Carnaby, who had been improperly assessed on a property her late husband had held in trust. And she worked it through to the end, carefully, and billed Mrs. Carnaby $3, and Mrs. Carnaby paid and shook her hand and said, I didn't know women did this sort of thing. Apparently we do, Josephine said. She wrote to Warren Hartley and told him she was leaving the room above the dry goods store, and she asked him to let her know if he heard of any other matters where someone might need a careful reader of old documents. He wrote back within the week to say he already had 2 names. She packed her trunk. All of it this time. The wool dress and the Bible and the $47 still remaining, and the law books with her father's handwriting on the flyleaf. She packed it and she walked out into a November morning. Frost on the boards of the step, breath visible in the cold air. And she stood there for a moment before she went to the wagon she had hired. She was not the same woman who had left. She knew that. She was not sure, yet, what woman she was. That would take longer to understand, would probably take years, would maybe be the work of her whole life. But she knew what she was not. She was not the woman who sat at that table and said nothing when there was everything to say. She was not the woman who swallowed corrections, and kept her voice careful, and waited for someone to notice she was there. She was the woman who had read the original conveyance. She was the woman who knew what the documents said, when the solicitors didn't. She was the woman who had walked out into the dark with $43 and a trunk, and found out that was enough. When the wagon reached the road that turned toward the Pruitt house, she did not look back at Market Street. She was looking forward. That was new too.